Southwestern Family of Companies welcomes you to the Action Catalyst. Each week, our diversely and amazingly accomplished guests share their insights and inspirations to help us ignite our own. So let's invest attention together to breathe, to reflect and refocus, and decisively defeat that voice we call Mr. Mediocrity. Then let's enjoy moving forward to make a positive difference in our world.
Today's guest is Jamie Beaton, co-founder and CEO of Crimson Education, the world's leading US and UK university admissions support company. One of the youngest in the world to be accepted into Stanford's Graduate School of Business, Jamie developed Crimson to bring together experts from the best universities around the globe, with users 4 times more likely to gain admission to an Ivy League university. Jamie shares some of the secrets to this success in his book, Accepted, out now. We hope you enjoy.
Well, welcome to the Action Catalyst, everyone. This is Dan Moore, and I'm very, very delighted to have our multinationally experienced and educated, amazing guest, often called Wunderkind, Mr. Jamie Beaton, joining us here. Originally from New Zealand, with stops at Oxford, with stops in Cambridge, Mass., currently in New York. Jamie, welcome to the Action Catalyst.
I'm super excited to be here. Great to chat today, Dan.
Well, we know from our introduction that our listeners have already heard about you. You have done some amazing things in the area of personal academic excellence, graduating and getting into master's program at the age of 19, and then a PhD as a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. What you've done is remarkable. What's even more remarkable is that you're becoming very much a catalyst for a lot of young people to get into the colleges of their choice, the very top elite colleges, 4 times the average acceptance rate because of the techniques that you've perfected and are able to teach to people. Share with us a little bit about why you actually got into this particular business. With your acumen, with your skills, with your background, you could be doing anything. Why did you put your entrepreneurial talents in this direction of helping others do some of what you've done?
Great question. So growing up in New Zealand, until I was 14, I was focused on potentially getting into a domestic New Zealand university, for example, doing something like medicine or law locally. And I'd never kind of even considered the idea of applying to one of these global universities. Going through high school, I had really no idea what entrepreneurship was. I didn't know what investing or Wall Street was. Quite fortuitously, I spoke to this boy who was the valedictorian of my high school. He'd gotten into Yale, and he told me that I should consider applying overseas. So I spent the next 4 years really building my candidacy for these top schools like Harvard. That really became the goal for me. And then once I applied and got into these schools and I actually got to go to these institutions, it was just totally mind-blowing. I was able to quickly meet so many inspiring students, classmates, professors. I was able to, build out my own company, Crimson, and begin working as an investment analyst in New York. And quickly I realized how transformative these higher ed experiences can be, especially for a kid like me from a far-flung part of the world like New Zealand. So when I launched Crimson, I really had a lot of passion behind bringing more students access to the kind of guidance they need to get into these really elite institutions that will give them all this opportunity. And I remember distinctly in 2015 or so, I was sitting at Tiger, which is a hedge fund here in New York. And I was looking at my Bloomberg terminal. I just finished some counseling with some students. And I was really thinking about, post-graduation, do I want to really go big on Crimson or stay in the investment world? And I really thought to myself that, impacting students and helping them find the best path for them, that is so impactful, so rewarding. And I also could do it all over the world. So I figured there was a great opportunity to build something that, had real meaning. So I haven't looked back, and I've been really going deeper and deeper into this education space over the last 8 years now.
Now, in my own experience of advising young people about college choices, so many of them sell themselves short. They say, well, there's no point in even applying. There's no way I would get in. How would you address that to a bright young person that is considering not applying to one of these top tier universities simply because of the lack of self-belief?
It's a great question. Okay, so the first thing is this problem often is actually catalyzed by guidance counselors, other folks in the school who might be just in the pattern of recommending local colleges and universities. And obviously these really competitive schools like Stanford and Chicago, they've got very extensive application processes. So it's a very big lift for everyone involved to send kids to these schools. And so I think in general, there's a tendency to deviate to more conservative options and take the path that's a bit easier, but that's really a huge loss of opportunity. So it's really critical that students are applying to the most ambitious schools possible for them. And, the good thing about this process is that it is a holistic admissions process in which, students are assessed based on the context of their high school. So if they go to a high school where a kid hasn't gone to, say, Yale in 4 years or something, or the school only has a couple of AP subjects you can take, or there aren't that many extracurriculars on offer actually, and you've got a student who's actually really thrive within that environment, they'll actually get a lot more support from the admissions office for doing that. So you actually do get a bit of a benefit from being one of the quirky few kids in your school that actually applies to these bold schools, which is even more reason to do it. The last thing that we do at Crimson is we've taken a bit of a Moneyball-like approach to this with our data science background. So we've built these college admissions algorithms which tell you, based on your SAT score, ACT score, or GPA, or extracurriculars, financial aid requirements, majors, other kind of preferences, what kind of schools are you likely to get into with what probabilities? And so our students will often be applying to reach, match, and safety schools based on probability rather than just intuition. And that helps to correct some of that bias in which a student might be skewing downwards through a lack of belief to, more conservative options.
Right. I like the Moneyball illustration. That's a fantastic way to look at it. Now, what about the role of parents in this process? Because parents are very much into the shepherding and sometimes the guiding and sometimes the coercing part of this whole process. How do you coordinate parental influence with student desire when they may be at odds with one another?
So the first thing is a parent has to play a valuable role in doing all three of those things. I see really talented students who are 5, 8, 10, 11, 12. And, when you're a particularly young student, even if you've got a lot of passion for academics, you still don't really have the ability to make all these choices for yourself. So having a parent that can encourage you to challenge yourself, hop into a more challenging math class or take an extracurricular like debating for the first time and begin to catalyze those different experiences for you is very impactful. So in my life, I had my mum, and she's actually featured in the book a lot, Accepted. And basically, she learned a lot of the academic content that I needed to know for my school up to the age of 10 or 11. We would do studying together on the weekend. I remember sitting at Wendy's with her preparing for certain exams. And she was a bit of a cheerleader for me where, when I was really under pressure studying some different tests or assessments, she knew what was going on. And I felt I had that strong kind of emotional support from her. And as I moved through high school and I got a bit older and I was really, leading my own charge and setting my own priorities and goals, that support role she played, that emotional stability was really critical in giving me more endurance to keep, taking more subjects, pushing myself harder, etc. So I do think, I see thousands of parents all around the world with many different parenting styles, many different cultural backgrounds across both America and the world too. And I think in general, the best approach is, you want a child who at least through probably the middle of high school has quite a lot of intrinsic motivation for the process, has found some majors or interests they're excited about. But you want an engaged parent or parents who, help, the child ride those different emotional waves this process creates for them. And I think that's, a really good harmonious state. Typically, when the parents are pushing too much of the process, it can sort of dilute the child's internal motivation a little bit, but a good balance is critical for success.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And I love the fact you're including all of these vital influences in this whole process. That's fantastic. It'd be pretty easy to look at your career and your young life so far, Jamie, and conclude that everything has been smooth sailing. But I think I know better. I'm sure that you've hit some brick walls once in a while where you've been trucking right along and all of a sudden there's an obstacle you were not anticipating. What are some strategies that you have found effective when you run into a sudden setback that was just out of the blue?
Some of the most challenging times in my life were actually in my last year of high school, where I had so growing up, I guess I grew up with my granddad, my grandmother, my mum, and my dad, and we're very close to family unit. And my basically there was a bit of a family challenge, illness with my grandmother that was really dragging on the family. It was a very, very sad emotional burden for everybody, and that experience was quite jarring for my granddad. And he was a big role model to me growing up. Since I was very young, he was almost like a second father figure of sorts to me. And so my last year in high school, I was sort of really grappling with having to play more of a serious role in supporting my own granddad emotionally alongside going through this really intense college process. And so without going into all the details, basically, I was really being stretched in a lot of different directions, and that felt like at some points, it was just too much. As far as how you kind of get through this, I think there are a couple of really practical approaches you can take. So the first thing is that when you're getting knocked down, so to speak, you got to keep those communication channels open to that select group of people in your life that you really trust and back you. So that for me was a couple of my best buddies. That was my mum, and that was my dad as well. And I'm not closing off, because I think if you open and share your stress and you share how you're feeling, that can often really help to alleviate some of that burden. A lot of the time, the way these things mount is quite exponential. You may have, say, 3 different bad things that have happened, and they feel overwhelming at the moment. But if you slow down and just talk through them one by one and realize actually you can hopefully at least mitigate maybe two of these things, that can really bring down the pressure quite significantly. The other thing from a practical high school perspective, to make this very concrete, is you can actually smooth many of the challenging milestones of high school over 4 years rather than just 1 year. So things like the SAT, things like your college essays, things like extracurriculars, you can actually bring them forward and do them in the early couple of years of high school. So there's less of this kind of big pressure near the end when everything is due at the same time. And so techniques like that in many areas of life where you just aren't allowing yourself to get to a point where there's just too many intense things happening at one time is a great technique. Then finally, of course, fitness and sleep are critical. I played a lot of competitive field hockey and tennis. Field hockey, I think, is more of a girl sport here in America, which was sad when I came to the US, realized. But basically, these sports really helped me to also get some extra, mental fortitude, because I think they really do help you with alleviating pressure and stuff too. And then sleep is something that a lot of high school students can start neglecting near the end of high school. But getting at least a good 7+ hours is, I think, pretty critical for that mental stamina.
There's a whole lot of valuable information packed into a very short response that you gave us there, which is great. Now, what do you do on a personal level to keep yourself growing, to keep yourself from getting satisfied or complacent? And some people might say, oh, he's too young to let that happen. But you and I both have known people that get a bit jaded, even in their mid-20s, where they feel as though, I've got it all. But you have that eagerness, that hunger, that desire to keep growing.
I think you really have to set up the environment around you very proactively to create the opportunity for continual learning. So in my case, what I do is I'm constantly doing at least one academic program alongside my work at Crimson. As I wrapped up my DPhil program at Oxford, where I was studying what drove student outcomes and student satisfaction in online schooling in particular, I'm now doing law school. And I find those experiences where I'm just learning for the sake of it very valuable. I then also, you want to avoid, so to speak, burning out. So I always have hobbies. So one hobby I play is a game called Warhammer 40K, which is a bit of a nerdy tabletop kind of game, but I really enjoy it. And a bit of time for yourself, some of these hobbies, whatever it is for you, can really recharge yourself. And then, of course, you've got to make sure your work is really stimulating. If you're choosing the right context, hopefully it shouldn't feel like too much like work. So when I build in Crimson, I have the thrill of seeing the students we've worked with for years is so engaging. And then, there's the business challenges, strategy questions. Should we buy this company? Should we invest in this business? That keeps you really fresh. And then I think continually resetting your ambitions, and then also having some longer term goals too, family goals. So I think it's all about continually looking at that growth mindset, sort of forgetting the past a little bit and what you've been able to do and looking forward and sort of continuing to tilt the plane of ambition to a higher horizon. The last thing is just who you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with people that have a growth mindset, that are also challenging themselves and are very ambitious, it's infectious. And, you get kind of like a 1 + 1 = 3 situation going on. So I do think, you want to make sure you've got, the folks in your life as well that do have that mindset too. And that will, really help you as well with that energy.
If you surround yourself with other people with a growth mindset, it is infectious. That is a brilliant quotation. I love it. And I'm quite familiar with Warhammer. When my eldest turned 16, we made a pilgrimage to Nottingham and we played a few games there. So I quite understand.
Wow, that is the dream. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I think you may be referring to Warhammer World, which is sort of the biggest Warhammer store, I think, in the world, or production place. So that's what you're talking about. That's very exciting, Dad.
That was tremendously fun. Now, what guidance could you give for our listeners that are maybe at the moment really struggling with a sense of direction? They may be mid-career, things are okay, just not brilliant, not great, to reinvigorate the sense of excitement. You've got some really powerful ways to just keep yourself reinvigorated. What could you pass on to people that are maybe a generation or two older than you about how to look at your current situation and find a way to get even more excited about it?
The first thing is people really underestimate how quickly you can pivot your trajectory or build some new skills that can meaningfully change, the pace of your career. So I see a lot of folks that are, in the mold or in the funk of a certain kind of job. They're not pursuing any kind of studying outside of their, career. And so they're really just going through the motions in one particular role. On the flip side, I've seen, for example, take one of our directors, her name's Janine Manning. When she was in her 50s, she decided to go to Cambridge and do a new degree in social innovation, and then pivot her role towards angel investing, corporate governance, etc. And she's been on a fantastic career trajectory over the last, 10 years or so, having made that decision to pick up that Cambridge degree after seeing all these Crimson kids, looking to do these top university programs. So I think first thing, people underestimate how quickly you can pivot and change to a new trajectory. So think about, it could start with a Coursera class where you learn, some basic statistics tools or some financial analytics skills you haven't learned before. or it could be a negotiating class online that helps you, manage conflicts in your job more effectively. And then secondly, often it can take only, 6 months to 3 years to pivot to a new type of role, but you need to ask. So, you need to either speak to your employer, figure out what other parts of the organization could be really interesting to you and how you can get there. Or, obviously you could change jobs too. But I think you need to switch from being sort of like a passive recipient of, working dynamics to being a very active learner. There's actually a really good book that I recommend. The book is called Power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't, by Jeffrey Pfeiffer. He's a Stanford Business School professor. And he talks about how in many companies, the dynamics is set up such that, you really have to think about your own career trajectory. You've got to ask the hard questions. You've got to ask for progression, because it's not always going to be the case that these things, just magically land in your lap. So being very proactive about, pushing your manager or other folks to engage with you on those career conversations will keep your energy replenished. And if you set the norm with your manager that you want to have those career progression conversations, you do have this clear career goal, that will force them to engage with you, and that'll become a clear priority for them.
These are brilliant ideas. Somehow, despite your obvious brilliance, your many achievements, you have a very appealing humility to you.
Oh, cheers.
What obstacles have you encountered because of your age in trying to get backing, trying to get support, trying to get buy-in, trying to get people to even believe in you at all? Have you encountered any, and what are strategies you could advise for our younger listeners?
So I would say whenever you're building any entrepreneurial venture, by definition, you are trying to build something new that's tackling a problem in a new lens. And so you've got, incumbents who are going to naturally want to push against whatever you're doing. You'll have people that are, initially skeptical. And so really entrepreneurship is often about pushing through waves and waves and waves of, detractors or folks that aren't necessarily on the same page, and then converting them hopefully to be big advocates for you as you go. So in my case, to give very specific examples, when I started Crimson, I was 18. I had, just had a great academic, track record at high school, but I had no teaching degree. And I was, guiding students in how to apply to these skills. And I knew that I had this knowledge and insight from my personal journey to add a lot of value. But you could see a lot of traditional guidance counselors would be very skeptical, or, teachers at schools that have been teachers for 20 years, wondering, why is this even necessary, especially in these international countries. And so initially it was about really focusing on student outcomes, and just in my first cohort of students, just getting some amazing college outcomes. So I could really speak to the track record of success, they had achieved. And those students can be really brand ambassadors and advocates, for us. So it was about creating that movement of credibility. The second thing that I did was to, try and build a lot of external validation for this, area of education I was focused on. So I did that master's in education at Stanford. I went over to Oxford for the PhD, looking at what drives student outcomes and student satisfaction in online learning. And I really formally studied in a very rigorous way a lot of these different problems we were encountering and regularly at Crimson for our students, and opportunities for them. So that when I spoke to, for example, heads of universities or heads of major schools, I had some credibility to stand on as well from an academic perspective. So I think you want to get both soft or informal credibility through success in whatever you're building, and then also look for those serious external signals of credibility too. And then over time, I've also been able to recruit some amazing advisors I'm really grateful for, folks like Larry Summers, who used to be the president of Harvard, and folks like Tomohiro Hoshi, who's the head of the Stanford Online High School. And, it becomes infectious over time as you keep building your organization and your principles become very clear and your results and impact are very clear. You can attract top advisors, which then amplifies that impact further. So there are a couple of the techniques that I've used to, build a lot more momentum behind Crimson from sort of when we started when I was 18 to now, 26, 8 years in.
So you were a Harvard undergrad when you started Crimson?
Actually, I started Crimson before I even got on campus. So I started Crimson in the middle of 2013, around March 2013. And then I, jumped on campus first time in September 2013. So my first recruits for Crimson were the 3 other kids that had gotten into Harvard from New Zealand that year, and a bunch of students from high school that I'd gone through and done competitive debating with or Olympiad with. And so I recruited this pool of great academic students from New Zealand. That was my first, pool of mentors. And then when I landed on campus at Harvard, I, recruited my kind roommates on the platform, freshman year, in the dorm rooms, etc., getting on board those initial mentors. That was kind of how this all began.
That's great. How big is your current staff?
It's kind of a crazy number, but we're up to about 650 full-time staff around the world, and about 2,400 consultants, mentors, tutors, teachers who do a lot of delivery as well. And our staff are really dispersed across a bunch of different countries, but America is one of the biggest destinations for our full-time staff. as well as the UK, Australia, New Zealand, China, Russia, Korea. These are all other major hubs for Crimson around the world.
And most of your staff is involved in the mentoring and guiding of applicants?
Yes, we have a dedicated technology, engineering, data science team that helps to build the platform that a lot of students learn through. So we've got like a video crew. We've filmed, more than 1,000 videos on these college campuses describing different parts of the application process. So we've got a very popular YouTube channel that a lot of students love to watch around the world to learn about these different skills. But yeah, a lot of our team are directly working with students. They're called strategists, working on their counseling journeys, figuring out, what they can do throughout high school to best develop their profile. We've got student success managers, curriculum designers, a really extensive team to make sure we're really putting our students' best foot forward.
That's brilliant. And do you have some full-time people working with you in the finance arena or operations, things like that?
At this point, we've got a pretty heavy-hitting, headquarter functions, finance, operations, human resources, sales and marketing, digital marketing, country teams led by local country managers that speak the local language and are responsible for running their particular neck of the woods. So if you go to Crimson in Russia, if you're ever making the trip, the whole office speaks Russian, for example, and has a lot of local cultural context. They can advise families accordingly. And then we've got a great, board and, fantastic investor base behind us, which has been great because we started this when we were very young. We're still pretty young, and getting that advice from those who've done these kind of things before us has been critical to being able to serve more students in the short period of time.
Good. Well, one of the other compliments I'd like to pay you is your willingness to bring other people into your team, because many brilliant entrepreneurs have a really difficult time letting go, sharing authority, sharing responsibility, sharing opportunity. Clearly, you don't have that hang up, and that's part of why you've grown as much as you've grown, and the impact you're having is so significant.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think this comes from the same philosophy applied to actually schooling. So for the students on the call and parents, a lot of students will go through high school, and if you're averse to asking questions, if you're that student who's a bit stuck in class, you don't quite understand a concept in English or in math, and you just leave that class, you don't ask a question, you just think I'll figure it out later, versus the student who proactively says, hey, actually, I want to get the answer to this question. I want to ask for advice, and I'm okay appearing that, I don't know what I'm doing here. That different mindset is critical, because if you compound just asking that one question a day over the course of 4 years of high school, the amount of extra information you soak in is far higher. And so I found, for example, even at college, a lot of opportunities, they're not advertised on a website. Like I had to go to, cold email different professors or different, advisors to get opportunities like my thesis advisor and stuff. And so I think that willingness to proactively ask for advice and, bring in experts around you is a critical skill. And furthermore, people are usually really happy to help. People love to share wisdom and expertise. And so it's very rare that you ask someone for help who's, older than you with a bit more wisdom than you, and they say no. Hardly ever happens. So it's more of that mental barrier within the student or the entrepreneur that they need to overcome. And then once they've sort of gotten over that, internal qualm, it's a very powerful trait.
It is, because people do like to share, particularly when they're asked by somebody that's got the heart and the sincerity that you've got. So, Jamie, time with you flies, my friend. This has just been a wonderful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you. How can people locate your book, and what's the best way to access more information about Crimson?
So people can jump on to Amazon. It's under Accepted. And if you want to hear more about Crimson and how we work with students across the US, just go on to crimsoneducation.org or type Crimson Education on Google, and you'll find us really quickly.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you very much. Keep up the great work. And listeners, always believe, don't let age be a limitation. Let everything be an inspiration. Thanks so much, Jamie, for joining us today on the Action Catalyst.
Thanks, Dan. Amazing. Thank you very much. It was super fun. Really appreciated your questions.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. To stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and Twitter at Catalyst_Action. Thanks for listening.